Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time you're listening to this podcast. And if you're like me and driving, please drive safe. So this is our second podcast. Welcome to Generational Noor, Chasing Hope. And today I get to introduce my co-host, Fatuma Noor. Hi, Fatuma.
Hello, everyone.
How are you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you guys?
I'm good. And we also have Mohamedamin. You can't see him, but you can hear him. Hi, Mohammed.
Hey guys, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Alhamdulillah. Ramadan Kareem.
Ramadan Kareem. Yeah, everybody who is fasting, hope you're having a great Ramadan. And we have a few amazing guests that are with us today. Do you guys want to introduce yourselves? You can start with Sulwan.
Okay, yeah, I can start. Hey y'all, my name is Sulwan. I'm from Portland. I'm so excited to be here. Ramadan Kareem to all those in our ummah watching. I'm excited for y'all to listen to this podcast.
Hey, everyone. This is Eisha Khan. Ramadan Mubarak. Salam to everyone. I'm really excited to where this conversation is going to lead us.
Hey everybody, my name is Fuad. I'm from Lewiston. Ramadan Mubarak everybody, and I'm very excited as well.
Okay, so just a little introductory question. Where is everybody from? And like, what's your background? Are you in school, graduated? What are you doing? Anybody can start.
I guess I'll start because you're making eye contact.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. I like it. So I'm Sulwan. Originally, I am from Sudan. My family migrated here 20 years ago, subhanAllah. And I've been living in Portland, Maine since I graduated college, alhamdulillah, last year, and I am pursuing healthcare. My demographic of people right now, because I live in Maine, is elderly people, but I'd love to work with women and hopefully in like derm too, inshallah. And I love being a part of community, so I've just been doing that ever since I was in middle school.
Inshallah. Yeah, I love hearing and getting to know more of you. And as I said, I'm Eisha Khan. I also was born outside of the U.S. I was born in Pakistan and moved to the U.S. when I was in middle school. So most of my growing up was in Texas, which was very fun and exciting. It's a warm state, a lot of people of color that I got to grow up around, and got my master's in graduate school in Massachusetts, and shortly after moved to Maine. And currently I am program manager for the Cancer Institute for Maine Health. I work on oncology services, and very similar, like I do love being engaged in the community and really integrating a lot of the work that is happening in the community and perhaps also not happening in the community, and integrating that into healthcare to really understand, advocate, and promote health equity. So, yeah, a little bit about me.
Hey, my name is Fuad Abdi. I'm right here from Lewiston, Maine. I was born in Bangkok, Thailand. Came here right around when I was 5. Grown up here ever since. Taking this semester off currently and just starting to get involved in my friend's organization, Generational Noor. And just very happy to be here.
Thank you, guys. So I'm going to just ask a little icebreaker question just so we can get to know each other a little more. If you could go back and give your 18-year-old self one piece of advice, what would it be?
I'll say we're going out real strong with the icebreakers. I love it.
I can start.
Yeah.
So if I could go back and give my 18-year-old self a piece of advice, it'd be that she's capable of like just everything that she wants to be. I think I was just very in a mindset of like not believing in myself at that time and just overthinking. Sometimes I still am, but I very much was before. So I think just, telling her that whatever she puts her mind too. She can do it, and she's like worth all the effort that she's like. It's worth it at the end, you know. Yeah.
Oh, I can go next. I think mine is very similar with Amran's. I'd just say be more confident in myself. I think around that time I would like let a lot of people tell me who I am, but just to, understand myself more and not let other people's words or ideas of me get to me. So like to understand myself better.
Yeah, I like that. I like what y'all said. So for me, I think I tell myself to slow down. I think I got caught up in like the traditional like, oh, you have to go to college, you have to like do this. I mean, a lot of it is just like my family came from like nothing really, so I wanted to like I guess rush the process so my family could be more comfortable. But then also acknowledging that I need to be comfortable and I'm still young and not everyone like graduates college in 4 years. It's okay to take breaks. It's okay to step back. It's okay to change. We're human. Our minds change, our bodies change. So our trajectory in life will change. So that's something I tell myself.
Yeah, I think I like talking to my 18-year-old self. I think she didn't have any boundaries for herself, which I love, and I would continue to, that would be the advice is continue knowing and exploring yourself. And as you both said, don't limit yourself based on other people's understanding of who you are, because oftentimes I think that's where you become defensive, like you're always defending an identity, and that takes you away from really exploring who you are, where you hope to be, and where you want to be. So my advice would be to my 18-year-old self, continue to do that and surround yourself with people who uplift you, who motivate you, and who inspire you to be your authentic self.
Yeah, if I could go back and give my 18-year-old self some advice, I would probably say a lot of things, but like you were saying earlier, I would definitely try to slow down so I don't get as confused and try to rush into things and feel a lot of pressure that's not really there. And yeah, I think I would just tell myself to slow down, just appreciate the moment and not let things go by without really being there.
Wow, everybody had amazing answers. Thank you guys. So one last icebreaker-ish question. Please, tell me about at least 3. It doesn't have to be 3, maybe just 1 if you can't name 3 influential people in your life. And how have they impacted you? You want me to, You want me to go? Yeah. Okay, so I can start with my mom. She came here with nothing, and she kind of navigated her life just to with nothing, just to make sure that I had everything that she wanted me to have. So she came to America with just like the clothes on her back and no family here, and just and now I'm able to have an education and everything that she wanted me to have. So I think like she's very impactful and influential to me in my life. Like every time I'd want to give up, I'd be like, okay, I gotta do this. My mom didn't come here for anything. And also, who else? I'll go with 1 and then think about the other 2. How about that? Yeah. Yeah.
I can go. As a co-host, I got to read the questions beforehand, so I'm lucky, and I got to think about them. So my first one would also be my mother. She's the definition of love and caring, and I think she taught us what love really is. And she always put us first before herself. So she is very influential. And then second is my father. So I think I'm going with the very cliche answers. But he came here with nothing, and built himself and educated himself, got us educated, and now he's a businessman with multiple businesses. So, and the second is the third is sitting to my right, Amran, Osman, my friend, and mashallah, I've seen Generation Noor grow, and it's so beautiful and inspiring.
Don't make me cry.
Oh, that's so beautiful. I'm like tearing up right now. So for me, I think the first would be the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam.
Yes.
I like, it's just anytime I'm down, I always turn back to like the teachings and the actions of the Prophet, and I find solace in that. So it's one person I can always go back to and know I can trust. Second would be like my parents. They come as a unit, so it's hard to separate them. My parents, they're so inspiring. They always motivate me to pursue like what I want to do, and they're very affirming in who I am as a person, as someone that grew up far away from what they understand as their culture, and trying to, I guess, intersect both like American and Sudani culture. And the third would probably be like the women in my community. Again, a whole unit, a collective unit. But I found so much peace, and I find parts of myself always coming back to my community in Maine. Shout out to Amran for being one of those people. My sisters and my halakha groups. Mostly just like the Muslim women too. Like I love y'all. So yeah.
We love you.
Love you.
Yes.
The most influential people in my life would be very similar or the same as everyone else's. Both of my parents, my mom and dad, both making many sacrifices and currently still making them. And it just is really inspiring to have people there since day one and never turn their back on you, and knowing that they're giving you the blueprint on how to raise your children as well. So that, and just every day still currently talking to them, being with them, and I guess they're just my biggest role models.
I love that. I think, yeah, a lot of commonalities. I'll start with my mom, who is absolutely amazing. Just watching her. So, as I said, I grew up in Pakistan, so my dad lived in the U.S. and we would come visit him, and he visited us. But it was really my mom almost serving as a single parent, even though she had, of course, the support and love of her spouse. But just watching her providing us with every opportunity, being so engaged in the smallest things to all the biggest things, it just made you feel seen. And it's like four of us, and we've always, she created that unity amongst us. And then I would say definitely my grandma. She is just one of those. And last year she passed away, and she was 103, mashallah, and had lived a full life of experiences and of all sorts. And my family is from Kashmir, so it's a disputed land, and she gave birth while they were going through the, changing of land and a lot of turmoil. And actually, my mom's calling me right now so she can hear me thinking about her. But my grandma, she gave birth under the ground while people were fleeing their house, and took that moment to connect with her neighbors, if you can imagine, who were of a different faith, and made sure that they knew that she's not leaving them and she's not leaving this place. She'll be back until her last, moment. She always carried this notion of going back and knowing that we're all connected to that space and being, and what that community means to us, whether we're there or not. It lives through us, and it continues to live through her coming generations. So I think that's a huge impact on how I see myself and how I carry myself, and knowing that so many before us, to continue to dream, because we're here because of dreamers who came before us, and we're here to dream for the ones who are going to be here after us. And I think those would be my two people. And of course, they're influenced by a lot of the individuals that you all share, like communities and the Prophet, and just the understanding of the Ummah as a one, and how that influenced all of us. And it's bigger than all of us too.
Sure. Wow, that's amazing. Okay, so I have to finish my answer. So I think going back to my parents definitely remind me of my dad. I didn't forget, I promise. But my dad is definitely an influence. He works all day and night just to make sure that we're fed and clothed. He takes care of us and he's always there. But also he's someone who like always reminds, like he doesn't give up on me if I make a mistake. And he always reminds me that like there's always like I can always come back from anything, and that like any mistake that I do, like I can always come back, and he's always there to just give me advice and always be there for me. And both of my parents are always like my biggest cheerleaders, and they're always just making sure that I'm doing well. And my third person or people would be my community, because I think everything that has led me to this point has been my community, and like just seeing the amazing work that has been done and that is being done, whether it be like the mosque or like my classmates or friends, just like doing amazing things. I think they just inspire me to always want to be better and do better for and then for them, just because I want to be like an impactful, like I think like there's so much going on in the community. You want to be like be able to help those around you, and just seeing that people are able to just see the like what's happening and like be the change, I think has made me feel like I can do it too. Yeah. um so Fuad and Eisha, you guys kind of already touched upon your backgrounds. But sitting at this table, we're all immigrants and we all come from like different backgrounds. So me, I was born in Kenya during the war in Somalia. So my family fled Somalia. My mom had me on the way. And then I came here when I was around like 2-ish, and we started out in Tennessee. We were in Lewiston. I was like it was around the time that like a lot of Somali people were coming to Lewiston, like Maine, and it was around like when like the Ku Klux Klan was like in like downtown Lewiston like rioting because like they didn't want us there. And I know like the story that like my mom told me about how like she like hid in the closet because she was so scared. So that's kind of just like my background of like our journey here, and like what I know my mom probably had to go through a lot. Like I was a child, so I don't remember that, thankfully. But as an immigrant, just coming into this country, I have to go through a lot. So just what's everyone's background? Where were you born? How'd you end up here?
I can go. Wow, but I'm like the KKK in Maine. It's very real.
Yeah.
It is very. The dynamic isn't the best, but you can find your safe spaces here. So, I, like I said, came from Sudan. My parents fled from the Darfuri genocide, back in like the early 90s. My mom's family had lived in eastern Sudan prior to the genocide, so they settled there like 100 years ago, but they moved between Darfur and Al Qadarif Eastern State. So when the genocide broke out, my dad was a doctor in Sudan, and he was there helping like people affected by the genocide. And so the government was like, no, like he can't be here. Like, so he's being persecuted. So he fled to Egypt. And my mom at the time when she had me, she was 22, 21. She was younger than me. So we fled, we had to flee from Sudan like 2 years later. And the ship I was on, we went to Egypt. The ship I was on almost sank in the river, subhanAllah, but my mom made it through. And then we came to Maine, and
Keep going.
we're experiencing some technical difficulties. Yeah, we came to Maine, and currently Maine has the largest Sudani demographic outside of, I think, Sudan right now. Actually, it might be Qatar, but one of the largest in the world. And most of them are Darfuri, so Western Sudanese, where I'm from. So it's really cool. I feel like I have my family here too. And then I grew up around Somalis everywhere, so Abayos, all of them. Like I speak. My dad speaks very fluent Somali, so that's my family too. An extension of my family.
I am the most boring out of all of you guys, actually. I was born here in the States. I was born in Baltimore, Maryland, but I am a daughter of immigrants. So in some senses, I can relate, but not in all senses. So very boring.
Yeah, as I said, I was born in Pakistan, moved here, and I think to add on, a lot of us, I think, perhaps identify as children of the third culture. So we definitely are influenced by our parents' culture and of our peers here in the U.S., but it's a blend of both, and it's like embracing and finding who you are out of that. So, there are times when you're like, I get that that's like a cultural norm of our parents or our community, but it doesn't really resonate. And then you go in the community, the larger community, and it's like those norms don't fit either. So it's like finding this group right here, the community within the community, that has really shaped and reformed and has helped recreate at least my mental models of and reframing who am I and how do I fit in a community and what is my voice. So that would be kind of like my perspective of growing up here in the U.S.
Yeah, again, my background, I was born in Thailand to two Somali parents, being an immigrant most of my life. But coming here very young, at 5 years old, I feel like I was raised here, fit in, other than not being the same as everybody else. I feel like there is a huge Somali community where I grew up, and a lot of people are going through the same thing I am. So it's easy to relate to many people, and it was a good experience growing up. I wouldn't say I would change it for anything.
Thank you. Okay, so we all grew up here. So the whole juggling of two cultures, like you said, is kind of hard. I know just growing up in an environment where you have to be one way at home, but then you try to assimilate when you're in school and try to be like your peers. And then you have to figure out, okay, what am I? What am I doing? Am I trying to be Americanized? Am I, for me, am I Somali enough? But then also it goes back to being Muslim. Am I a good Muslim? What am I doing? So just kind of tackling all that and growing up here kind of just shapes you in a way where it's different than growing up back home when you're around people who are from the same religion and same background. So what has everybody's experience been on that front? How has it been with two legs in both cultures and trying to juggle that?
I can go. I think for me, it's just embracing what you're around is you. Yeah. You can't run away from it. You don't have to undo it. And for me, the biggest outlet was art. So growing up, I did a lot of art, and my mom was very creative in her thoughts and how she dressed, and a lot of that influenced me. And I grew up, as I said, in Texas, and the school I actually went to, there weren't any. I think my cousins and I were probably the only people of color and Muslims. We had maybe a handful of Hispanic students too. So the people who reflected me were my family, right? Were my sisters or my brother or my cousins, and just we all grew up in a relatively, I would say, a safe space where we were able to express ourselves and our identity. And the nice thing about growing up in a culture that was very different from ours and didn't really have a good understanding of what Pakistanis are, or aside from the media, is that we got to define who we were. So I was very involved in arts and sports and did soccer, cross country, anything and everything. And also kind of, I would say, also benefited from tokenism, because you could be the one Muslim person who they can represent and say, hey, Tomball has diversity. But I think it's because we were so comfortable in our own creativity and being able to speak our mind, and we're encouraged to be part of discussions. Especially, I would say a huge credit goes to my mom. She just was our biggest cheerleader and made sure that our voice and our perspective was heard, and that people that we were actively soliciting that type of feedback and activity. I think that really helped me come up with that third identity, like, who am I? Because you're right, like, when you're in Pakistan, you're not Pakistani enough, you're American, but when you're in the US, you're definitely not American, because that's like overpowered by white America. So it was great to kind of just be ourselves, live a very sheltered life, and then but be given enough tools to where when we did step outside or had encounters that maybe didn't feel right, they weren't taken personally on a personal level. Oh, this is a reflection of me, or they're talking about me. But being able to say, oh, that's a reflection of your own understanding, and that's a reflection of certain communities within communities, that I am as distant than you are from them. And I think that just allowed us to just be ourselves. And I think now, more so living in Maine, it's been a little bit of an eye-opener, because I think in Maine people have a perceived notion that they're not racist, that they are inclusive, but I'll be frank, it's because they haven't been challenged. So when you are that challenging force of any sort, because you're coming up with your own perspective, that's where I'm starting to see, oh, okay, they're not exposed, so they're not as polite. They don't have the political lingo that maybe Houston or Texas that has so much diversity to where you don't say things that are inappropriate, even if that's your own belief. But just navigating through that has been great, a great experience, and doing it with a community like that's one here and also abroad has been great in that identity that I've created for myself and continue to explore.
I think growing up with one foot in both, it's really helpful that there's such a big Somali community and Muslim community. And one of the most important things is don't ever forget where your parents come from and your culture. But when you come here so young, it's really easy not really easy, but I think it's much easier than coming here as an adult to just kind of mix in and not feel like you have to start from the beginning, because coming here really young, it is the beginning. So just the most important thing, I think, for a lot of us is just not forgetting our culture and remembering who we are and who our families are.
Well said. So this is like a really big question, so I have to sit on it. But also, I was actively listening. I think existing between two different cultures can be a very traumatic experience, but it is also a very beautiful experience. When you're like an immigrant / refugee, you're always migrating. And like the one thing I really appreciate is my dad is Pan-Africanist. Like I grew up in a very Pan-Africanist family. And so I was cognizant of the fact that like Black and African history has always been rooted, like since I can remember, in movement, starting with like the Trans-Saharan slave trade, the transatlantic slave trade, and the movement of Black people in America. And that has helped me a lot with my identity and understanding that my identity will always be warped around migration. And so it's ever changing. And I grow an appreciation for that. And then also I grow an appreciation for Black people around me too. Black history. I love like Black American history and like what's it called? Louisiana. And then I had the opportunity to study in Ghana. Just learning about all of that is a very beautiful thing. And then also learning about like connections between Africa and Asia during the silk trade, and how we all kind of come together, and how I'm doing that too right now, in the present with my community. So that's kind of how I get around existing between two different cultures, and also just bringing aspects of like my Sudani identity to my community and teaching people about who I am just by being there, and wearing tobes sometimes and being like, oh, like tobes are kind of like saris, and people always say that, but also just like the uniqueness of it. Yeah.
Wow. Give me a second before you answer.
Okay.
Amran is like moving this closer to me. I'm sorry if y'all couldn't hear me before.
Wow, where do I start? So, I think growing up, I grew up in Maine, so I had a lot of Somalis around me, like Fuad said. I felt like I had enough, I saw enough Somali culture around me to understand who I was, in a sense. But at the same time, my father growing up was always pushing that, hey, you're a Somali. Hey, this is your tribe. And tribe in Somali culture is very, it's a lot controversial, yeah. But he would tell me my tribe. He would tell me where my family was from. I grew up with all this knowledge. You guys hear me? Okay. So I think, in a sense, I didn't question my Somaliness until I lived in Egypt. When I lived in Egypt from, I think, 8th grade to 11th grade. And it was just hard to explain that, hey, I am Somali, but I live in America. Like, I'm not American, but I live in America. And when they started questioning it, like Egyptians around me, that's when I started questioning it. And then I had to go through this whole process of relearning that I am Somali. I live in America, but I'm still Somali.
I love that. Yeah, there's a lot of questioning. I was at the mall and I'm just walking and someone stops. It's me and my sisters and they're like, where are you from? I'm like, Lewiston. And she said, no, where are you really from? And I was like, no, we were all, because like they were all born here. So I was like, we were all born here. And she goes, oh, so you're like a native Mainer. I was like, but what exactly is a native Mainer? Like, what makes you a Mainer? Because at the end of the day, this land is nobody's other than the Native Americans. So what exactly is a Native Mainer? So I think the whole juggling of two cultures is definitely hard. Growing up, for me, the experience was really interesting because elementary school, it was like when everybody, like there was more people coming in, but then not a lot. So like there'd be classes where I was the only Somali person, and like sometimes you feel like you can feel when like you're the only person in the room, right? And there's nobody else that looks like you, and like there'd be moments where someone would say something racist, and like you don't know how to approach that as a child, so you kind of just like internalize it. And then gradually I'd have like more people around me that looked like me, that were from the same background, not just Somali, but like just people of color, immigrants. So just having people around me just kind of made me feel more comfortable. And I realized that growing up, okay, because with the whole tribal thing, that wasn't instilled. I didn't know about tribes until like high school. Yeah. So it was like I was like, okay, so do I know who I am or do I not? Like, what exactly am I? Mm-hmm. Am I American? Am I Somali? Like, how do you juggle that? And I realized that's like something that's a struggle for a lot of youth in today's America, where they're trying to fit in and they're struggling and they're trying to be one way at home and one way at school, and there's that like internalized like struggle within them. So that's one thing that I've like realized, especially doing generational Noor with like substance use, mental health. A lot of youth are struggling with these matters, but back home you don't have that conversation because at the end of the day it's haram, or it's just a no, you're not going to talk about it. Mm-hmm. So how has everybody, like, what has been everybody's experience around mental health and substance use disorder in their communities? Like, what have you heard? What stigma? What conversations? Because growing up, there was like definitely a big stigma of like, no, we're not going to talk about that. That's not a conversation that's going to be had. Like, just leave it. Bye. So what's been everybody's experience?
I can talk about my experience because I've seen it more often now that I've had the opportunity to be grown and go back to Sudan and see how like mental health manifests itself there. And yeah, like people don't talk about it, but it's very prevalent, especially because Sudan has seen so much like civil war. We're in a revolution right now, genocide in the last few decades. And like you see your family using substances to escape the situation that they're in, and people are always like, oh, like that's just shawatin, you know, like they'll blame it on shaitan before like blaming it on the fact that people are traumatized, and trauma passes down generations, and our kids, you know, they manifest it in all that stuff. And so I think when I was able, like recently when I went back to Sudan and I saw the situation, I had to step back and be like, how is like my mental health back home? Because I know I'm really good at escapism. Like that's my thing, escaping and like existing in a world of delusion all the time. But it does creep up sometimes, and I find myself like I find a desire to want to do something to escape from it, but I'm just like something's holding me back. But I understand that that's my trauma pushing me, and I have to deal with this like head on. So I've been going to therapy, but I do realize it's a privilege, like to be able to go to therapy. A lot of people don't have that, and a lot of people don't know how to access it. But going to therapy is helping me better understand the situation around me and how my traumas are existing within me, and my generational traumas exist within me.
Yeah. What's up?
I can go. Going off of therapy, I always say I'm a psychology major, just finished, so I have a bachelor's in psychology. Thank you. And I think just telling elders that I'm learning psychology was such a I felt like I was being held back. And the one thing I hear most often is mental health is not real. There's why are you going to be a therapist? It's an Adan thing. Like it's a white people thing. Like don't be a therapist. There's no need for that. There are a lot of people who, mashallah, are pushing me to be a therapist and telling me that, yeah, it is needed. But there is that majority that's it's mental health is not a thing, and it's not, and it's horrible to see in your own culture, in your own community, that half these people don't believe that such a big thing that's impacting us is not even real. So
yeah, I think that's super interesting. You're right. We have these 3 levels of understanding of mental health in our community, and by our community I mean generally the BIPOC/Muslim community, and the intersection that goes between that is one is complete denial that these things happen, right? There is just the sheer existence of mental health. Then I feel like the other sector is believing, yes, there is you have mental health, but your only outlook is faith, which is limited to reading Quran, doing more salah, fasting, maybe just talking to your own parents, keeping it, if you know of a bad thing, keep it to yourself. I think that's like an Islamic or just like a cultural thing we all kind of in different cultures, shared cultures have. And then we have this last tier within the community, which is acknowledging mental health exists and acknowledging our culture and our religion exists, but having that the two are separate. So you go for mental health, you would go to Western ideology, and for your own personal growth and spirituality, we go to our culture and our customs and our religion. And I think the whole idea of this third identity that a lot of us share and have a understanding that our culture, our understanding of mental health and even our religion, it's tinted by our customs and our regions and our ethnicity. And this is an opportunity for us to continue to tint that in a more positive way, where we can uplift and see where the teachings of Quran, at least for me, I know I've spoken to Amran before, is not to romanticize our religion and our heroes. Oftentimes, I think that's where we then just default to praying. Because if you see the life of the Prophet over and over again, from the first revelation to his very last, moments, he openly expressed depression and anxiety and sought help in his wife and other communities, where his wife took him to other leaders in the community who assisted with understanding of the being, of understanding of the personality and how different things come around us. So I think it's like not romanticizing that we have to uphold this identity or religion, the most perfect of humans, at least for, people who observe and practice Islam, is prophets, and yet prophets face depression, anxiety. In fact, right after the Prophet ﷺ, his wife passed away, that whole year is known as the year of sadness. Just to even think that an entire year is categorized of someone's entire life as sadness, and we don't talk about mental health, and that we can be in denial of mental health is kind of mind-boggling. And I think for me personally, part of my identity and culture is to just take a step back and see who are some of our, what are some tools that Islam, and what are some rights and resources that Islam offers us, and how do we integrate them into American healthcare system that clearly lacks health equity, inclusion, and diversity, and bringing all these elements just not to just uplift the immigrant experience or the Muslim experience, but to really uplift the life of anyone who is impacted by mental health, because at the end, mental health is an essential part of our overall health. And if we begin to stop talking about it or categorizing it as only we only talk about mental health when we walk into a specific type of office and not to our, masjid or to our homes, that's where it becomes problematic and it's truly not integrated in our lifestyle.
Yeah, for me, I think substance abuse and mental health are both really big things that used to seem like taboo to want to talk about in the home or with your parents because it was almost shameful. But just everyone kind of knew that there's someone either in the home or a friend or just somebody that everybody knows that is struggling from substance abuse or mental health, and they don't want to be outed as crazy or a bad person just because they're struggling with the same things all of us are, whether that's just anxiety or being a little bit depressed. Or I just think it's a really big thing that's used to not be spoken about at all, and it's starting to get more comfortable to be brought up in the house.
Thank you guys. Okay, so with the whole taboo thing on mental health and substance use disorder, for me growing up, there definitely was that taboo with the culture, religion. There's a lot of people, like you said, who take their religion and culturalize it, and they take the culture and use it as a sense of religion. So they're like, oh, this is haram, but there's nowhere that it says it's haram. So they're basically taking these practices that they've been doing and making them religion, where it's nowhere in the Quran. So within our communities, mental health and substance use disorder has been looked at as oh, the person's crazy or they're going through something. And even within the mosques, it's been a taboo of okay, we're gonna do Quran Sara, which means we're gonna read Quran on you, and the jinn, what's jinn in English? What is jinn in English?
I mean, if you don't know this time, I feel like people have been around Muslims enough to know what
they should know.
Existential being, right?
Yeah, they're that an excess
demon,
a demon.
They're a creation made of fire.
They're possessed.
They possessed.
They're possessed by something. So they're it's not something that they're dealing with. It's not them. It's per se. So why do you think our communities look at it this way? Why do you think our communities, what shift needs to be made for our communities to actually start looking at it as an actual thing? Substance use disorder is a disease. Mental health is something that everybody's struggling with, whether it be depression, ADHD, even when it comes to autism, there's a lot of people that are like, oh, like, pray it away. I'm like,
Or
no,
push it
that's not
under the
how that's not how it works. But what shift needs to be had for us to start having these conversations and like getting people the help that they need and deserve? Very hard question, guys. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I know you guys don't have all the answers.
We got time.
Yeah.
Maybe we should ask the psychologist.
Yeah, I probably shouldn't have said that. I think 100% more education. I think if we, one thing I always say to people who are like, oh, mental health is not a thing is, think of it as like a broken leg. And I think a lot of people use this analogy. If you have a broken leg, you're going to go to a doctor.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, Quran Sara is going to have, or Ruqya or whatever Islamic practice will have a lot of its benefits. But Allah tells us to do, you're supposed to tie your camel. You're supposed to believe in Allah and have taqwa, but also, I feel like we should be translating these things, but also tie your camel, which is a Islamic saying for do your part. Believe in Allah, but do your part, right? So if we break our legs, we're supposed to also do our part. We're supposed to, yes, read the Quran on yourself or do Islamic things, but go see a professional. And the same thing with mental health. There's certain things that Islamic practices can help with, but it gets to a point where you have to see a professional.
Mm-hmm.
So educate yourself and educate the community. Hopefully, Generation Noor is on its way to educating our Portland community, our main community. Inshallah.
Yeah, I think that's really good. For me, it's humanizing the experience. I think what I really do all the time is try to, like, for at least Sudani people, trying to connect it back to the Prophet and the Sahaba and like their experiences. Like the fact that the year of sadness existed for the Prophet, you know, like the stuff happens. And then also just having a conversation that we live in a society that is very disabling if you are not like white, male, and all that stuff, you know, if you don't have money, you don't have wealth. So the society makes it very difficult for us. And it's not just like, it's not you problem. It really is the kind of systems we live in. Capitalism is not the best, you know, it doesn't work in our favor. But acknowledging that is a first step towards moving towards change, you know? And it's just like those, like, I guess taking away the responsibility of the anguish and the fear they have, acknowledging substance abuse and their own mental health problems. It's not your responsibility that it happened to you, but it's your responsibility to change and move forward. And we can do that as a community too.
100%.
Yeah, I think for it to not be so taboo, we would just, as a community, just stop correlating it with shame. Like having people's families kind of talk about things behind other families' backs, like, oh, so and so is doing this, or did you hear about so and so's kid, when everybody's struggling with it in some way or another, and we can all just help each other and not shame each other, kind of just all be there and kind of uplift our community by just knowing that everyone's kids are going through different things, and we should just not judge. That's not our place.
Yeah, wow, this is a big one. I think a lot of different things come to mind. I'll start with, on a personal level, I do feel that we use identity as, especially as a Muslim identity, since we are talking, a lot of us, I guess that's a shared identity here at this table. I think we like to call ourselves Muslims and just hold on to that identity too strongly. And I'll say, like, that's not a bad thing in any means, but what we end up doing is just masking everything else behind this identity. So not saying, oh, we're Muslims and we're accountable to things like, you know, our tenets. And to be a Muslim doesn't mean just an identity. It's to, you know, live our life according to the rules and regulations and the life of the Prophet. But I think it's when we become so infatuated by that this is an identity, and as long as I hold on to it, I'm protected. And it's almost giving this false identity of oneself to where nothing I can do is wrong, or if I continue to do it, all solutions come to me. And Islam, like you said, it's very clear, like, help comes to those who seek help. And I think it's when, like, some of the examples that were shared at this table even here is, well, just read or do X or do Y, and not participating fully to help ourselves. And if you look at even within Islam, like, the beautiful thing is, if you look at the 9th century, a lot of the scholars, in fact, about mental health and even ADHD, that those conversations started in the 9th century, and in the Western world, it didn't start until the 19th century. So we do have scholars, and we do have the teachings that I'm escaping the scholar's name, who talks about anxiety and depression and a lot of these things in 3 different formats, where the first is genetics, like biological, how there are things within, within your family or your genetics that cause you to behave or think or operate a certain way. Then there's environmental, which today we would say psychological, or like, the environment impacts how you behave and how you respond to things. And then the last one is your own personal, like, how are you internalizing a lot of these things. So I think even when we talk about how do we dismantle some of this, it's to take a step away from our identity that we're holding so tightly to, and take a few steps back and say, okay, what does this identity mean? If I were to put it on a table, would I want to resonate with it? Is this the same identity that I read about in Quran? Like, you're asking me to read and recite. Is this the same identity that would ask me to do those? I think if we begin to do a little bit of internal reflection and community reflection, I think that's a good way to then begin to talk about how these things impact us on an individual level and also community. And then I think the second part, what you really put out, is we do live in an environment where mental health is secondary for all people, and especially if you're a person of color or communities that are disenfranchised on a political level, on an educational level, on a health level, access to healthcare system is so limited to where even when you get there, you don't know what to ask, and people don't know how to treat you. So that's where I think integration of spiritual services within healthcare systems becomes really important. Cultural sensitivity and taking a step, an additional step to cultural humility. Yes, we should take an active role in understanding the communities that are around us, but also humbling ourselves as, professionals who are in the healthcare field, to know that there's something this community can teach us, and not everyone is going to behave the same way. That we, as patients come in, having a shared decision model is so important. So we're making collective decision about a personal health that is going to impact them on a personal level, and also their communities and families. So it's I think there's some work we can do as a community, but then also we have to recognize, as Sulwan said, there is structural racism and capitalism that doesn't prevent and doesn't create spaces, inclusive spaces. So also the community as a whole, we have to take a step in understanding how do we actively solicit feedback in decision making from communities of color and those who have historically been marginalized.
You actually kind of went to where I'm kind of bringing the conversation. So us kind of being all first generation, we've probably all been like the interpreter for our parents, been the application filler, did all those stuff. And the community conversations that we've been having, a lot of the people have said that the resources are not geared towards our communities, and it's been harder. So how do you think that affects people getting help when it comes to mental health and substance use disorder?
That's a good question.
Because for me, I'll go on a tangent just to give everybody a little time, because a lot of the conversations we've been having, a lot of the people have been saying that there's that communication barrier, but also when you look at the stats, Black women are more likely to die during childbirth than any other community. So obviously there's that fear of these systems because we've been marginalized for so long, and our community doesn't get the resources that other communities get so easily, that are so easily accessible to them. So that's one of the conversations that we've been had. So I think that's one way where a lot of the people who are struggling, like, there's that fear of the system, I believe. If you guys agree, like, why?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And also, in order to get help, you have to be able to see that help visually. And, if you see a lot of the posters or infographics, none of them resonate. If something doesn't resonate, you don't see yourself, how would you walk into a clinic and say, oh, that's what I want? We are as a visual community, we are an oral community, so I think all of the work that you're doing is just so critical, Amran, because it's understanding the needs of the community. If you are talking about an oral community, you have to do roundtables because that's how people connect. That's how they share their experiences. That's how they pass their wisdom. So I think there's a huge disconnect between wanting to do something, your intention, and action. And I think we have to start to evaluate and hold institutions accountable for their intention and make sure that it matches their action. So as I said, whether it's actual representation in infographics, getting it translated, and also making the welcoming experience for, as I said, I work for a healthcare organization, and I've witnessed myself sometimes people who look different from, the majority of the front desk or the providers. People take a pause or they get frustrated. Oh, I can't understand what is happening. Why is this person walking here? They know they have the resources. They should have a translator. A lot of shoulda, coulda, woulda falls under the person who's walking into the door, who we forget. And that's where trauma-informed lens comes in, is going through a lot of traumatic experience. They're not just coming here for mere preventative care. If they're coming for any specialty, whether it's mental health or cancer or any kind of specialty treatment, they're gone through a whole experience, and their experience is not reflective in medical education. It's not reflected in medical training. It's not reflected in medical media or communication. They're taking everything on their own. It's like the onus, they've already taken that onus to walk in. So if they're going to walk in, do their part, which frankly, they don't even have to. We need to, as an institution, play our part in making sure we're asking the right questions, including the right people, and taking, again, an approach of cultural humility where we humble ourselves and say, okay, we have some expertise, but that's not matching the needs of the community. So where are we lacking? And I think that can be the first step of identifying what resources are needed, and then partnering with organizations like Generational Noors who are saying, hey, this is how our community talks. This is how we communicate. These are our needs. Now, here you go.
I agree. I think a lot of what you said harps on the fact that, like, it's actually humanizing us, right? Because we live around people who honestly objectify us, and that's white people. Like, we are just seen as objects all the time. Even when I was attending my previous institution, very elitist, top institution, but everything that was done in the classroom just objectified us. We were a theory, and they could understand that, oh, like, these communities, there's trauma in them. Most of them not recognizing that, it's your people, it's your ancestors, it's you right now actively creating these systems and upholding them. But they were able to harp on the fact that, oh, like, yes, our communities have trauma, but they can't humanize us. And the work that you're doing actively humanizes us and ensures that the people who have a hold of these institutions, who can create the change, who have the resources, the money, see that too.
Yeah, like Amran was saying earlier, with the communication barrier, it's just really tough to get help for physical like ailments as it is. So I think those like mental health and substance abuse and things like that just get brushed down the line because it's already so difficult to get help with not with just physical problems that might pain you every single day. So I think people just brush that off. Like it's already tough enough to get an appointment, get there on time, bring my kids with me to translate and or have a translator. It's just such a big deal. Like instead of just making one phone call, going to to any specialist office and just feeling comfortable. It's just such a process, so people just avoid it.
Yeah.
Going off of what Aisha said, representation. I remember there was an event we did with a Generation of Noor, and we sat down and did this flyer and infographic for this organization. And I remember everyone being like, if I saw that, I would not go. I would not look at those resources. I would not think that was for me. So we dissected it. We pretty much lined out how we would like to see these resources and how we would like to see these flyers and infographics. And we made a completely different flyer. And it was like something completely different. So I think taking in the insight of our people, if I think they need more diversity in these organizations and listening to our people and seeing what we need. And I think seeing us represented in those flyers and those organizations would help us, in a sense, look out for those resources a little bit more.
Mm-hmm. I love that activity.
Yeah, oh my God, it was
That
so
is
fun.
cool. Yeah.
I love all your answers. I think every single thing that each of you said is definitely needed, especially in a community that wasn't, or like a system as a whole that wasn't built for us. We need to find a way to make sure that it's able to be restructured and like work for us. And it's going to take us to do it, even though we're not the ones that made it broken. We have to rebuild it and come as a community and do that. So I want to thank each of you for your answers. I genuinely liked all of them. Sulwan, college student.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah. Never leaving education.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's okay. Education is very important, especially for us being first generation in our families. But also hearing that first generation, there's a lot that comes with that. I think each of us can like hear that, and there's that like burden of, okay, you're it. It's up to you now to make a name for our family, be that change. So a lot of college students struggle with mental health and substance use disorder because of that burden. I think it's a lot when I say burden, but definitely a lot of them see it as a burden, but they don't understand why it feels like that. And I might be putting a lot on you right now.
I feel heat.
Yeah. But have you had those experiences or had peers who've had those experiences of like, I'm struggling mentally, but I cannot say that because I was brought here by a family that struggled and lost a lot to bring me here, and so now I can't say I'm struggling. Who am I to struggle after they've been through all that to bring me here?
Yeah. I had that realization real quick my first week at Bowdoin. Just stepping into that environment, it was a culture shock. Mind you, the school I went to was 25 minutes away from where I live, right? Like, and Maine is relatively the same wherever you go. You have pockets like Lewiston and Portland where you see some diversity, but it's not to the extent you'd see it outside of New England, really, you know? And I went there and I went on this campus. I was excited to help to live my college experience, quite frankly, because I understood college being the best 4 years of your life, which is a lie. That's very much white culture and wealthy culture if you have the money to do so. So I went, and then I think maybe a month in, I was just struggling. I at my public high school, I struggled, but I had resources. And I had a community that was actively learning to accommodate us. Can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Okay. That was actively learning to accommodate us. And what people don't know is like when you get tied up in like the concept that college is the best 4 years of your life and you're not like wealthy, you're not white, you like the mental illness is coming quick because you're just like people like have resources to get them out of trouble and stuff, but you don't have that money. You don't like if you are rushed to the hospital because say like you got drunk one night at a college party and your stomach has to be pumped, you're paying for that bill. How you tell your parents that I did this and stuff? And so like the education system, specifically post like the second college, I don't know the difference. College is not accommodating for us. And so people like us are going to struggle quite often. And I know like these institutions are like, oh, we're actively trying to accept more first gen students because they benefit from going to these schools. Because let's be frank, if your family makes more than like 150K a year, or like if you are wealthy, you don't benefit from going to college really. Like you'll be fine if you go to college or you don't go to college. So them accepting us is okay. Yeah, that's a good thing. But what are you doing to ensure that we succeed? Our mental health is taken care of. We don't fall victim to college culture that isn't accommodating to us. How are you doing that? And I think institutions are moving towards there, but the way colleges and universities are structured will never really get there because it is a police state, really. You're always being observed. Yeah. It's scary, but I could keep on going on. But that's how I kind of see like how we fall victim to substance abuse and like mental health at college level.
Does anybody drive a Jeep? No? No? Oh, okay. I guess there was a problem. It's going to be edited out.
Okay, I drive a Kia Sportage. I don't, and I'm like I'm blocking a Mercedes. So if anyone talks about that, like let me know.
Okay, I got you. But going back to your answer, I completely agree. I went to USM and I lived on campus and I saw a lot of my peers struggling where it's like I'm struggling with mental health, but I don't have any outlets because my family doesn't understand what mental health is. But the school doesn't have any people of color in the counseling system, like as counselors. So who am I going to for help? And then they start using like alcohol as an escape. But then like if that gets them in trouble, I can't tell my parents. I'm gonna be disowned, or I'm not. Nobody's gonna look at me the same in my family. So I have to figure out a way to get these get help. But I don't have the financial capability. I can barely pay for school. So schools have that where you have to go to school, you have to graduate, but they don't give you these systems to get through it as a person of color because, our white counterparts have like their mom and dad helping them. And I'm not going to say all white people have money. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that there's always someone that they can look at that looks like them, that they're able to ask for help or they're able to, have resources. And there's that whole being a person of color, you don't have counseling. Like in Maine, there's barely any Black counselors or even Muslim counselors. So you majoring and doing what you're going to do, like, inshallah, we will all be here clapping for you. But anybody else have anything to say regarding school, college, even high school with people struggling?
I think it's also the idea of model minority, like where you have to really fit the mold of how, like you said, you're constantly policed. So the idea of model minority, to not object, to be submissive, all these things to where you are seen as acceptable. And once you get to this model minority being accepted, then you're compared at, oh, you're okay, but it's the other people who look like you, right? Like, we're friends with you. You and I, we get along real well, but it's those other people who look exactly like you, they're the problem. I think it's just like really struggling with that and how that translates into professional environment too. It's just really scary to see you are being watched, monitored at every second of your life, and someone is watching and waiting for you to fail. And I think that's where that anxiety kicks in, whether we recognize it or not, and knowing that there's not a place where you can fall down and jump back out of. And I think the other thing is, like you said, it's not so much that these conversations are about white people don't have anxiety or struggles or aren't, from diverse socioeconomic backgrounds. The point here is that their struggles are not because of the color of their skin. Their struggle is not because of their religious identity. Their struggle is constructed based on the environment, and realities. And I think it's also for us to take a step back and say there's nothing internally wrong with being from a lower socioeconomic background or having a job that is not quote unquote a CEO. Like, those things are okay, but you can only thrive in those systems when people are respected, and as you said, Sulwan, are where you're humanized. You're not seen as just an object who we are going to criticize, analyze, objectify, and police. Right? I think that's where young people, especially if that's how you're brought up, just imagine like the second you graduate college or high school, you're like, wow, everyone else had an equal opportunity except me. And now I'm stepping into a place where I'm not paying you to be here. Instead, you're going to pay me if I fit into your culture. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where your whole reframing of, okay, how do I fit in? How do I survive? It becomes so critical. And we, again, lean on trying to fit ourselves in the mold that are never made for us. As you said, these systems are not made for us. They're not intended for us, yet we're forced to live within them. And anytime we try to expand them, it seems like, oh, why for you? We're not doing that for anyone else. But the fact is, these systems are made for someone else. Yeah. And they're intentional in that.
I love that you said that, because a lot of the conversations, or whenever I bring it up to people who are not from our communities, or not immigrants or in the BIPOC community, they're like, oh, but everybody's struggling with mental health, or, oh, everybody's struggling with substance use disorder. So I'm going to just go through a few stats right now and just, listen and give me your feedback on what you think. It's speaking of college, I'm gonna give you guys where I got it from. I got it from I got it from the main CDC website. So from 2019 to 2020, overdose rates increased by 44% and 39% among non-Hispanic, Black, and non-Hispanic American Indian or Alaska Native persons, respectively. As country-level income inequality increased, overdose rates increased among Black people. So the lowest Black people or Black descendants were the lowest treated for substance use disorder. Next stat is drug overdose rates. Well, death rates rised and widened by race and ethnicity, so 2 times in countries with more income inequality. So overdose death rates for Black people were more than 2 times as high in countries with less income inequality in 2020. So basically, those who are, in like racial disparities and like not making enough low income are the ones that are dying more. And you gotta like look at it that way. 7 times more overdose rates in older Black men were nearly 7 times as high as those in older white men in 2020. 2 times higher of young American Indian and Alaska Natives of women deaths were 2 times higher than white women. And in just 1 year, overdose death rates increased 44% for Black people, 39% for American Indian and Alaskan natives, Native Americans. So most people who died by overdose had no evidence of substance use treatment before their deaths and were from racial and ethnic minority groups, and they never received treatment. So more people from racial and ethnic minority groups don't receive treatment compared to white people. So we can just marinate in those numbers for a minute. And if anybody has questions or wants to see these stats, they will be up on our Instagram as well as our website, just so you can, do your research and learn more. And just so you know, I'm not just spewing numbers at you. Anybody have any? How does that make you feel, or does that just make you? Because I feel like us being as people of color, when we hear those numbers, we're like, oh, okay, that sounds correct. We've lived it, we've seen it. But people who haven't been in our communities are like, oh, okay. So I think me saying those stats were not more for us, but for those who are listening that are not from our communities and are questioning why these conversations are being had and why we're doing these community conversations for our communities and why it's needed.
It makes me emotional, if I'm being honest. Because we see this, our friends, will talk about it in passing and stuff, and we'll be like, oh, we live in an era or a time where it's just American culture is just once you get older, you have access to drugs, you have access to substances. You're not really introduced to this earlier on, so it's so normalized, but we don't have access to the help like our white and wealthier peers do. And it's hard to have those conversations. We're living in a time that's kind of anti-woke. I say all the time, this anti-woke era, post-pandemic, where people are just we know about racial disparities and we know everything that comes with racial disparities and economic disparities, but we had the conversation, so we don't need to do that anymore. And people do not want to sit in their uncomfortability. And I'm a firm believer that for change to occur, you need to be uncomfortable, because it's testing what you understand as life. But the statistics, knowing that these statistics exist is emotional. Once I hear them, I was just you just take it in and you're just wow,
Yeah. I think the other part of what makes it really emotional, I agree with you that that's the first instinct is institutions are actively collecting this. But what is being done? This you said between 2019, even just these numbers alone, it's been 5 years or 4 years. This is not news to anyone. And yet, every time we come across adversity, it's the first time we're experiencing it. None of these things, these are historic. These are, happening over and over again. So I think, to me, the first thing comes up is we continue to say almost this, never again would this happen, or with everything, whether it's George Floyd or other things, it's these major things, but it's the communities we are in today, or our world, it's all about that shock factor. People are only moved if it's shocking enough. And to me, it's we're immune, basically, when someone says, oh, this was collected starting in 2000. That means between 2000 and today, we've been immune to these numbers and these statistics to where we haven't done enough. What would make it so shocking for someone to say, okay, this stops. We're going to take an action and we're going to continue our journey in that evaluation. So I think that's what is really striking, is this is happening. It's been happening. And we have been collecting, and by we, I mean the institutions. So what steps are they taking? What steps are we taking to this almost, I don't know, just do something about it. We're more than numbers, and we've lived these lives. We live these truths and realities, and these numbers have to change and reflect the community where we can be, our potential, and not just our circumstances.
100%. I completely agree with both of you guys. We're definitely more than numbers, but even when I found these statistics, I was like, because when I first started this organization, I was doing research and I was trying to find numbers, and these weren't posted until like the beginning of this year. So these numbers weren't even public. So even being more than numbers, prior, we weren't even worth numbers.
Mm-hmm.
We weren't like,
Wow.
They weren't putting how many of us were dying or how many people were passing away. So the fact that it's finally out there is something that I'm like, okay, what can we do now? What are the next steps? And that's just to say that it's not just up to us. It's up to these systems.
Mm-hmm.
These systems need to make these changes. We are going to be the ones leading, but those who are listening that do work in these systems or work in these places, it is up to you to think like, what can I change? What can I do? What am I doing wrong? How can I make this person who wants to get help feel more comfortable? Do they need a translator? Are my flyers culturally competent? Is the work that I'm doing culturally competent? Is what I'm doing enough? Because you have to look at it that way. Like, is what you're doing enough? Because it's been generations upon generations where people have been dying, and we've been losing so many people, where it's like, okay, what can we do to stop that? Especially within these communities. So it's more so what's next, and how can we make it stop? Wow, that was very eye-opening and hard conversation.
The CDC, man. Throwing facts at us.
Yeah. How's everybody feeling? Yeah. I can tell by everybody's face that you guys seem a little, a hit, right?
Letting it marinate.
Yeah. So I'm gonna just, in conclusion, when we're hitting the ends of the podcast, what are next steps? What do you think should be next steps as like a community? What needs to change as a whole for us? Because we can talk all day about these topics, but you being in the healthcare field, what do you think needs to be changed in those systems? Like psychology, what you think, what methods do you think need to be changed in that field? What can happen in those instances? Miss Community Leader over there.
Doing his homework.
What do you think needs to be changed, and what you think impacts need to be made? And you, Fuad, being someone who's very like an avid community changer, what do you think needs to be changed, and what changes need to be had within our communities? Next steps for the youth that are listening, what can they do?
Wow. I'd say get educated. Again, going back to the education, get educated. Learn more. Get uncomfortable, as Sulwan said. There's no change until you get uncomfortable. And yeah, education. I think that's the first step should be education. I think we can't do anything until we know what we're talking about and what we're dealing with. Look into these stats. They're on the website. They're on Instagram. Go look into them and go get educated.
100%.
I agree. Yeah, don't use TikTok as your only reliable source. I definitely say that. But I think, honestly, the youth has done a great job putting themselves out there, specifically with the internet, and showcasing to us what they're experiencing, their adversities. I think it's more so now our responsibility to acknowledge this and know that we are living in a time where youth are navigating the world in such a different digital way. And listening to these like digital platforms and what the youth are putting out is kind of our responsibility now, because we do a great job like blaming Gen Z on being Gen Z, but we don't know, like, we don't teach ourselves or try to learn why they act the way they act. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say the first thing is, I think just hearing a lot of this is to lose hope. My first thing would be not to lose hope. Find community, reach out to people who you trust, whether it's online resources or actual physical resources. Immerse yourself in the community where you feel trusted, respected, seen, and then taking a break. That's totally okay. Just walk away, because you can't show up every single time the same way. So know who you are, talk to yourself, connect with yourself. Where do you see yourself today, and what resources are you looking for and seeking? And do your best and just don't lose hope. And then I think from an institutional perspective, I would say a lot of programming, and I think, Amran, you're probably aware, it's like, what are the numbers? How do we prove? How do we make a case for programming? And the thing is, I think we need to really reevaluate our systems and take a step back and say, okay, how about instead of saying, what is the need? Because clearly there's a need, whether it's on numbers, as you said, this is the first year, but this data is from 4 years ago. So there has been a need for more than today. Is to not create our programmings based on numbers that show need, but continue to put out programming until numbers prove otherwise. So really redoing until there's no longer inequity. Continue to do and evaluate yourself. How good is your program based on that, and not say, well, let's see how much inequity we have, and based on that we're going to create a program and then see if it's working. But no, we need to just all be on the same level. There is inequity, whether it's on a number, it's orally communicated, or it's visually visible. Those exist, so we have to start creating programming and continue to implement those programming until proven otherwise. And I think that could really help people reframe, reshift, and undo these type mental models that are basically making people accountable for showing up when people have been showing up. You're just not looking. You're just, blinded by these numbers.
Yeah, I agree with what you guys were saying about getting uncomfortable, just not ignoring the facts, and just try to get involved in something, because there are organizations starting to help out people with all sorts of problems. So just try to get involved in something and just try to be a part of the change.
Thank you, guys. So if anybody wants to get in contact with you or ask you questions or follow up after listening or watching today's podcast, how can they do that? Do you have any social medias that they can look at? Well, everybody's pulling theirs out. Please follow, just to stay updated, follow Generational Noor's Instagram at Generational Noor. Visit our website for questions, www.generationalnoor.com. Feel free to send in questions. You can send them in anonymously, or, if you want to be on the podcast or have anybody that you would want to see on the podcast, please send that in. And here you guys go. You guys can share your socials. This is where you can find our guest on social media.
I'm on Insta at Fatuma_Noor1.
How do you spell
Fatuma? It? Okay. FATUMA_Noor is NOOR1.
All right, I'm gonna follow you. Make sure to follow you. I'm the Sudania, and it's spelled TheeSudania, like the stallion. That's Sudania.
I love
Big
that.
Megan Thee Stallion fan. So follow me, reach out to me. I love making new friends, and if y'all like follow me, I'll like give you a little shout out or something.
Yeah, you can reach me or find me on Instagram at F1_Jamal_. with 2 A's, so JAAMAL, and then another underscore.
Sadly, I don't have Instagram, but I did create a LinkedIn thanks to Portland Empowered. So my LinkedIn is, I want to say Eisha Khan. I should have checked. It's just my name.
I think it's Eisha Khan.
Yeah. I was like, I don't know if I put my middle name. No. So it's Eisha Khan, EISHAKHAN.
Thank you guys. They are all very nice. I promise nobody will bite. Please reach out to them. Follow.
I'm vegetarian, so I definitely will not bite.
Again, thank you guys for being guests. This has been a very amazing conversation, and we want to thank our videographer and editor. I will put his social media on the ad during our Instagram and our Facebook. Yeah, you can follow him. He has a lot of amazing work that he does. So thank you so much. And yeah, please, if you want to hear more, follow our Insta, socials, and YouTube. Subscribe, right? Subscribe, follow. I'm trying to remember what the YouTubers do.
There's also a newsletter.
Yeah. Oh yeah, we have a newsletter also. So send us your email and we'll add you. We have a few those who are fasting. Even if you're not fasting, we have a few Ramadan events that are coming up. We'll be playing squash and we have a lot of events that are happening. So please join us if you're in the Portland, Lewiston area. You'll have food, build community, and learn more about substance use disorder and mental health. And also always feel free to reach out to me. Again, thank you guys so much for listening in or watching the podcast, and subscribe to Generational Noor Chasing Hope. Have a good day.